So now we move to another survey, the one that I told you about that we did as part of our program. And I would like to introduce Todor Galev from Forum Democrat Bulgaria that will present some first result of the survey and the in-depth interviews.
Our in-depth interview shows that even in these countries where there are partnerships between the secondary schools and industry or business, private sector, in many cases, these partnerships remain still passive or formal. And this is a major problem for some of the countries like Bulgaria, Serbia, partially Lithuania and Greece. And one of the recommendations that we can formulate from this is that we need a special focus in our policies for get more closely industry or business private sector to the science education in all of these countries. But how to make this, how to help teachers and schools to have better science education and to develop better science education in the secondary schools. One of the possible ways is to use additional funding sources for improving their science education teaching. But as you can see, the majority, almost the half of the teachers have never used any financial instrument to support their STEM teaching. In many countries, teachers are mentioning that government funding programs aren't working well, actually. Like in Bulgaria, for example. Even in Germany, there are some voices about this, which is quite important. And here I want to stress your attention on something which is about the regional dimension. Still, in some of the countries, there are quite big differences among the curriculum in STEM, depending on where the school is located. But regional programs, as you can see, are one of the missing, let's say, points in the support for science. So the inspiration of the European institutions for supporting regional policies in science and technology and innovations is not transformed actually still in national policies for regional support of specific science branches or science and technology branches. And if you look at the country maps for in Europe, you'll see that in every country there are some regions that are specialized in specific science and technology domain, either ICT or food production or something like that. And this means that in these regions, secondary schools could be also specialized and supported to have more STEM teaching in these domains. And this is somehow natural development because science and business in this domain is there. They can help local schools, not only schools, but of course universities also, and even kindergartens to inspire peoples for these scientific domains. So this is one of the lacks. This is something which lacks in national policies still. At the same time, if we ask both students and teachers in the 7 countries that we studied about how they cover the 3 important aspects of science and technology, like environmental or sustainability implications of scientific activity or everyday implications of science, ethical considerations raised by advances in science and so on, it looks like everything is okay, that teachers cover these three important aspects. But still, the opinion of teachers and students differ on this. Students are a little bit more pessimistic, let's say, on this. They think that teachers discuss the application of science, for example, in the everyday life, of course, but the share of students is quite smaller as compared with the share of teachers that think the same. And another important result that we found, or conclusion that we can draw from our data, is that teachers tend to assign to their students mainly tasks related still with the theoretical side of science and technology, and not with the practical experience with science and technology. And if you look at the three columns or bars, you'll see that the first one is actually the very theoretical part, just looking for some general knowledge related to science and in external sources, either for preparing their homework or for something else. The second bar is to prepare a presentation, which means that the students will need some specific knowledge even in looking for and selecting the respective and reliable information, which, if you think, is kind of a knowledge and kind of skills that are part of the scientific world, let's say. And the final one, to carry out a scientific experiment and to present the results to their classmates, is at the end, this is the hands-on science, let's say. And if you look at the frequency of doing this, and this is frequency of assignment by teachers of these tasks to their students, it's clear that teachers tend to be still more related to a theoretical part of science. If we compare the teacher's opinion with the student's opinion on this, we see that a comparative bigger share of students assess themselves as having experience in the first two fields, both presenting in the last two fields, both presenting science and education, science and technology, and carrying out a scientific experiment than the assessment of the teachers. Partially, we think we do not have a clear results from our survey still, but partially we think this is due to the nature or aptitude of students to overestimate their own experience in their own practical experience. But still, students assess themselves of being more experienced in hands-on practices than the teachers do. And somehow, surprisingly for me, there are no significant differences across the countries in terms of presenting STEM among the students. And of course, the hands-on leaders, as I said, are UK and Portugal, with more than 70% of the students that have frequent or multiple experience in carrying out scientific experiments. Modest achievers are again Bulgaria, Serbia, and Greece. But either for theoretical side or for practical side of doing science, students need sources of information, of scientific information. And as you can see, the online sources are preferred. Internet is the ultimate source. But there is something which is very important here. Internet, as you know, is quite rich domain of information, but only insignificant share of students across all the countries use specialized web pages, which means that there is a huge room for development of STEM-related learning materials, e-learning materials that can be put on the internet, and that can be and students can be pushed by their teachers, and the teachers can be pushed by the national policies to use this kind of specialized e-learning materials that are already available and that should be produced in future. A big threat for me is the using of Wikipedia as one of the main sources. As you know, Wikipedia sometimes is very good. Even I use sometimes Wikipedia, I have to confess. But for some language versions of this source, the limitations are really high. Of let's say of reliable scientific information that could be found in Wikipedia. And something which is very important, and that was confirmed by several of our questions, but here I show only one of them, is that family members are in general not engaged in students' activities when they look for scientific information in order to prepare their homeworks or everything what they need for their school. And if you remember the previous presentation about scientific capital and habitus, family habitus, this is exactly what it is. We need to engage family members to work together with the kids on science. I'll skip this because it's the same. What are the main fields of scientific experiments done by the students in last academic year, last school year? Actually, physics, chemistry, and biology are on the top. And I call this the missing T in science and technology experiments because it's really technology what is missing here. Because physics, chemistry, and biology, it's more related to science, and technology, engineering, computer sciences even are missing, which was quite surprising for me, especially for some of the countries where these domains are quite well developed, like Germany or United Kingdom. Still, of course, there are significant differences among the countries in terms of fields of students' experiments. But still the technology is missing, and this is also important because actually the modern technology, as all of you know, it's science-based. We cannot understand even the everyday technological applications without a lot of science. So there is again huge room for development of both the policies and practical and practices. And one of the technological domains and one of the technologies that we usually consider as indispensable part of our everyday life, ICT, information communication technologies. As you can see, they are used in all of the countries in different ways with different frequencies, but still even the most innovative, let's say, ICT equipment like smartboard is used in all of the countries. But what is important, still students think that the availability of ICT equipment is insufficient. And what teachers underline, especially in in-depth interviews, is that ICT is still used in more classic way. And we do not fully realize the potential of ICT for online training, simulations, even to replace missing equipment or lack of equipment in some cases. So again, it's not only for the frequency and availability, frequency of use and availability of ICT in the schools, it's how we use these technologies. And in addition to the availability and frequency of use of ICT technologies, there are significant differences among the countries in terms of availability of science laboratory equipment for demonstration and experiments. And as you can see, there are some leading countries like UK where this is almost solved, let's say. But in other countries like Bulgaria, Serbia and Lithuania, the lack of enough or sufficient laboratory equipment is a real problem that should be solved in near future if we want to develop really good science education in these countries. If we ask students whether they want to make something, doesn't matter what, which sounds good, clever and cool, they will say yes, we want. It's another question whether they will do this even if you offer to them this opportunity. But still, as you can see, half of the students in the 7 countries wants to have more STEM-related classes in their education. And especially in Germany, Greece, Serbia and UK. And especially for these countries where the level of science and technology education in the secondary schools in a lower stage, let's say, more students are desiring more STEM related classes, which is quite understandable. But why choosing science, technology, engineering, and mathematics? Why? The previous presentation was very comprehensive for this, actually, for the United Kingdom. But our study shows that even in countries with low achievements in science education, students recognize them as a necessity, both for their future scientific career or education career in the university and for their professional career in the after that. And again, on the highlights of these preliminary results. First of all, it looks like that secondary education is still related more closely to science-based world than to business industry, including in countries with decades-long tradition in science and technology education like the UK. And partially this is not only because of the national policies and views about science in the schools and science in universities, but also about the general view about science in a classic way, like big science which is done only in the laboratories and universities, and which is quite different than the everyday business and everyday life. And if we want to change this, we need to change the general attitudes to modern science, not only in secondary schools, in pupils and students in the universities, but also, let's say, in adults' generation. Because this general view of science is the big science, public funded, in public funded research organizations, somewhere there, is quite destructive for the younger generations. Science education in all of the countries is still much more theoretically based than focus on hands-on practices. Even in leading countries, it looks that the respective policies have not provided the expected results. So we need a new focus for this kind of policies, and changing the family habitus and science capital, as we said, is one of the things that we have to do, we must do. Need to involve family members to work together with the kids. Our in-depth interview shows that there are only single good practices in this. We need special focus of public policies in this. And what I called back to the offline library, or back to the classic library. Particular attention is required in training students how to recognize the real science from the parascience or false science, especially in the online world. And I really will be I personally will be very happy if I see more younger students and pupils in the offline libraries and not in the online libraries. Even the offline libraries now are not so rich and not so accessible than the online ones, but still, I believe that touching the books is of the same importance like hands-on science experiments. Okay, these were the only few highlights from our study. As I said, we have to produce a comprehensive report on it, and it will be published within the March project, so it will be available for all of you later on during the project. If you want, you can consult the March website, let's say 2 months, after 2 months, to find this report there. Thank you very much. Okay, any questions?
Todor, can I just check? Is it my understanding that actually quite a lot of the findings in this survey mirror to a great extent the more comprehensive and in-depth analysis that's been done in the UK? It looks as if it is a recurring picture across at least the 7 countries.
Yeah, actually, I didn't know all the results of this study in the UK, but only part of them. But actually, yes, you're right. Our results mirror, and in fact, for many of the conclusions made in the UK study, you can find the evidences in the results of March survey and March in-depth interviews for other 6 countries. Of course, I would love to have the same resources to do the same in the other 6 countries, but yes, we can see a lot of similarities between the 2 studies.